Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Scott Abel and I'm your host with the Content Advantage talk show for content professionals. And I have a co-host on the line with me and a special guest. Our co-host is Megan Gilhooly. Megan, wave and say hello to the audience.
Hey there.
And also our special guest, Alexis Haselberger, who is a time management specialist who will be talking to us today about how to develop healthy habits that allow us to maintain our focus and reduce all that stress while we're trapped here working at home. And maybe trapped isn't the best way to describe it, but I know we all feel a little bit different about our work environment given the situation and the coronavirus pandemic. So we thought we'd meet today and talk a little bit about content with an expert who might be able to help us develop some new habits for working from home. Megan, could you tell us a little bit about what your interest in the topic was and why you thought it would be important for us to address this today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of us, content professionals and everyone, are facing challenges that maybe we haven't faced before. So we have to be more productive. We have to get more stuff done. And I think Alexis is the perfect person to tell us how to do that.
I think so too. Alexis, tell our audience members a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in maintaining focus and reducing stress.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you guys this morning. And I'm a time management and productivity coach, but I spent 15 years in startups before that, where there was way more to do than people to do it. And so what I do now is I help people to figure out, how do I take this limited amount of time that I have and do as much as possible with it so I can still have some time for myself. And I think that's actually so important right now, because now we're, I don't know about you guys, but like I'm in a position where I'm basically am never alone, right?
Right.
And so the ability to really focus while we're at work so that we have some time for ourselves after is really important.
And we have all these distractions, right? In fact, this morning when we were logging on, all of us have to acclimate, right? We have to figure out the technology that we might not use in exactly the same way we used prior to the pandemic. And now we also have all the common interruptions that would take place if you were at home. So even if you're experienced working from home, now maybe you have other people who weren't supposed to be home with you.
Right.
And I know you both actually have children and family members. How does that impact everything?
Yeah, it's interesting. So you may see kids walking behind me. I'm a parent of 4. I know you have at least a couple kids, right, Alexis? So I think that's an interesting topic. And you had explained to me a way that you set boundaries within your household that I thought was really, really brilliant. So can you just kind of share some of that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So one of the first couple things that we did when all this was happening, right? First, we designated zones for every person, kids included, during the day, right? So it's like one of my kids has a bedroom, one has the dining room, et cetera. And then what we did was we created a schedule that's actual physical, posted. It's like a spreadsheet, but I print it out every week. And it just has the names on the top and it has times on the side. And it's just not a multicolored crazy schedule. It's just red when you can't come in, right? And so for each person in our family, it's like you can look and you can say like, oh, they're in a meeting, they're in a class, like don't come in. And a lot of people said to me at first, like, this will never work. But I swear to you, like last week, I heard my kids, I was in a meeting, I heard my kids outside my door whispering to each other, said, she's in a meeting, don't knock. And then I heard them patter away. And I was like, it's working.
It's working.
I love that. I love that.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. I wish I had a door in my basement here that I could lock them away from, but I can't. So, but I hope some people can think about that.
I think also like when we have to think, and I'm very lucky, I have an office because I always worked from home and I can shut the door to it. But I think, for people who are living maybe in a roommate situation or, where you have a smaller place, you can still use signage, right? You can put something on the back of your laptop that says, I'm heads down in a meeting until, put a sticky note there that says, please be quiet until 3 o'clock. You can use headphones, which are the universal signal for don't talk to me, right?
Yes.
There are a lot of ways that we can introduce signage to help other people help us create our own boundaries.
And speaking
of I love that.
Before Megan asks you the next question, because I know she's got a follow-on for this, I wanted to remind our audience members, if you're new to watching a webinar on the Bright Talk Network, you should know a few things really quickly. We can't see or hear you, even though hopefully you can see and hear us. You can, however, communicate with us using the Ask a Questions tab. You can ask a question that we'll try to get into the show and talk about. If you've got a second, just click the Ask a Questions button located in your webinar viewing panel, and you can text a question to us. We can't text you back, but we'll try to answer the question if we can in the time remaining on the show. Also, one more thing on the way out the door, if you'd rate the presentation here today and let us know how we did on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 is a high rating, 1 is low. There's a little field that you can type in your comments about what you thought or suggest a topic for a future show, and we hope that you do. Also, there's some attachments on your webinar viewing panel. If you're new to Bright Talk, you can click the Attachments tab where you can get some troubleshooting information about your computer and Bright Talk. You can also learn about the sponsor of today's show, Zoomin software, and about the guest on the show. And Alexis has provided some additional materials that relate to the topic that she's going to talk about today. So do check the Attachments and Links section before you leave today. Okay, without further ado, Megan, take it away.
Very good. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about being on video. So we think about kids coming into the video or husbands coming. You've seen pictures of, other people, roommates coming down with their pants off or whatever. So we know we have this problem, but it still is very important, I think, to be on video. And can you talk a little bit about why you think video is such an important medium right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, we just all have to accept we're all in the same place. There are going to be dogs and kids and roommates with their pants off, right, coming through. Right? I think we've learned that about each other. But I think the reason video becomes really important at a time that we're not able to be physically near each other is due to this law of communication that's called Dr. Moravian's law of communication. And it basically states that when we understand things from other people and their communication to us, only 7% comes from the words we say. About 38% comes from our tone and our voice, and the other 55% comes from our body language, right? So from being able to see people's eyes, to see if they're bored, to see if they're multitasking, to, see if they're kind of shrinking back or if they're upset at what you say, all of these things. And if we're not in the same physical space with somebody, we don't get that. And there can be a lot more miscommunications. And also just like morale issues, right? Like we want to be able to see each other as whole human beings. And so even if we're uncomfortable with video on, even if we're not looking our best in the morning, I actually think it's really important that we just default to video on. And if we can understand that we're all in that same situation, I think that that's great. I mean, I don't know if you've heard people saying we're all BBC dad now, right?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, yeah. So hearing that from, that guy who was on the BBC interview and like his wife came in and pulled his 2-year-old out.
Right.
We're all that.
Yes.
Now, right.
We're all that. Yeah. That's interesting. So,
well, let me jump in. I've got a question from the audience that relates to this. And I think you touched briefly on the fact that there's some research behind why we should see each other, I think is the main message. The question is, how do you convince leadership and anyone else in the company to use their webcam? I'm the only person, our viewer says, who uses it, and I've been requesting it. What would you do?
So this happens to me all the time. So a lot of my business was in virtual state even before all of this happened. I do a lot of like virtual workshops for companies, right? And something that always, like I even just say it at the beginning, I'm like, hey, this is a video on situation. Video is going to help us to stay engaged with each other. It's actually going to help us to get there faster. I think on meetings, we can say to each other, hey, this meeting will actually go faster. We'll get more time back if we're all engaged and paying attention. And if we see each other, that's the best way for us to be engaged. So I think part of it is maybe a top down, like, hey, we got to do this. And the other side of it is like, why should we do this? Why is this actually important?
That's a much better way than I do it. I typically joke about people not having done their hair. So I really like your way. It's probably much more professional than the way I typically handle it, but I am so on board with that. I've always been I've had a lot of remote teams, and I've always said, you can work remotely, but you need to be on video. Mm-hmm. And unless you're sick or, there's some reason why that's not possible, but it doesn't cut it to just say, no, I'm not in the right place. Get to the right place, right? Do your hair if you have to do your hair. Whatever you need to do, get on video. I love that. So there's another question that I think is interesting. Is it reasonable for employers to expect longer work hours because we aren't commuting?
No.
It seems difficult to establish boundaries between workday and home when we never leave home. We are all thinking this, right? But this person says it seems advantageous to some employers. So what do you say about that?
I have a background running HR and business ops, and I actually think this is a terrible idea. We should not be expecting people to work longer hours because we don't want people to burn out. And also we're nice people, right? Like we want people to have lives. And so I actually think that that when we expect people to work longer hours just because they're not commuting, that's putting a really undue stress on people at a time when we're already super stressed out, right? We may not be commuting 2 hours a day, but we're homeschooling our kids, right?
Right.
Like there are a lot that we're cooking every meal, 3 meals a day. Like how many dishes is that, right? So it's not, I don't know about you guys, but it's not as if we're experiencing like a glut of time here. It's just that the amount of things that we have to do is actually increased. And I think that the employers who are going to come out of this with high morale, low turnover, et cetera, are the employers who really understand that we're dealing with a lot more now and that we should help people to be more efficient, not to work longer hours.
Yeah, think about
I totally agree.
Think about the grocery store. Sorry, Megan. Think about the grocery store. You might have had it in your mind that it takes you 17, 20 minutes or something to go zooming through the grocery store because it's your neighborhood grocery store. You've been there before, but now you're forced to wait, right? It could be a 2-hour adventure. So I think there's also this idea that the tasks that seem mundane and only are supposed to take a little bit of time, we have to allocate more time to them, which means there's less time in the day to do all the things that our companies want us to.
Yeah.
So you know what I find, which is related to this? I find that having, again, managed a bunch of people, I find that it's sometimes as difficult as a manager to ensure your people actually set their own boundaries. And I know I have to set my boundaries and I have to protect my weekends and I have to make sure I get off at a reasonable hour so that my kids aren't wondering why mom is still working, right? And I need to set those boundaries as well, but I feel guilty doing it sometimes. So I think sometimes it's coming from the employer, but sometimes it's just a really like an A player just has a hard time kind of dragging themselves away from their computer when it's always right there, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, I've worked from home for about 6 or 7 years, both when I was running remote teams, when I was an employee for other people, and also now that I have my own business. And so this is definitely something that's near and dear to my heart because my office is in my home all the time. And one thing that I think is really important about setting these boundaries is actually to just pick a stopping time. Like it doesn't have to be the same time every day. But at the beginning of the day, you should know I'm going to be stopping work at 5:30 or 6 or whatever time it is, because that does a couple of things. Like one, it helps you communicate with everyone else around when you're going to be available, both at work and at home. But also there's the law, Parkinson's law is that work expands to fill the time allotted, right? So if you have an expansive time and you don't have a stopping point, it'll actually take you more time to get stuff done because you won't be in a kind of done is better than perfect mood. You'll just be in a perfectionist mode of like, I can just keep working on this until 11 p.m. And so by picking a stopping time, we actually can help ourselves set those boundaries that help us and our company because we'll get more done if we have a stopping point.
Yeah,
it's interesting. One of our audience members just wrote exactly what you just said. So they said strategic coaches teach to pick a time to stop your day. Yep. So that's really interesting. Another question that's coming in, I don't even need to ask my questions because these are all awesome questions. Another question is, how do you detect burnout in an employee when you're in this remote environment?
Yeah. So, I think that one thing that we need, we're probably all zoomed out on meetings right now, right? We feel like we're in it all the time. But I actually think that the one-on-one and honoring the one-on-one is now more important than ever, right? So that you do have some alone time with your manager where you can connect. Maybe even instead of having like an hour once a week, maybe we have 2 half hours or something so that we're in connection more often. I don't know what's going to work for everybody, but I actually think that like, we need to be asking the questions. Hey, how are things going for you? Is there anything you need right now? Like we don't want to skirt the line of being too intrusive on people's privacy, But we also, I think, actually do need to be asking more questions about, hey, what's going on? And if you start to notice, oh, hey, people are never on video, they're answering you with one-word responses, like they don't feel very engaged, like that's a conversation worth having, even if we weren't in a pandemic, right? And so I think it's staying attuned to the changes that you're experiencing in your employees, and then actually bringing those to light and asking them if there's anything going on.
Here's a time check just so that we know where we're at. We're about halfway through the program, so we're doing great. And we've touched on some of the subjects that we plan to, and we're getting questions from the audience. So if you just joined us, please know that you can click the Ask the Questions tab and ask a text-based question of the panelist, and we'll try to slide it in if we can. Related to the topic that we are discussing, yesterday we had a pre-call to kind of chit-chat about what we were going to talk about today. And Alexis, you pointed out something I thought was really important, that technical communicators and information developers already know, but we might not apply it to our own life. And I'll give you an example. When writers want to be useful, they try to tell the end user as much as they can. And so, everything is important, right? Because it can happen. And so we need to let them know. But that kind of gets us into the trap of everything's a priority. Can you talk to the fact that everything is not necessarily equal in priority, and how can we start to think about that in a meaningful way?
Yeah, for sure. And so I think that, when we think about priorities, right now we're in a very different position, right? We have more demands, as we just talked about, right? And it can feel, I know so many of my clients have said this to me, how do I prioritize when everything's urgent and everything is important, right? And it's not, even though they think it is, even though it feels like that, it is not. And so one thing that I've been trying to have my clients do is actually to try to flip prioritization on its head a little bit. So instead of saying, okay, what are my priorities? What are the most important things? Look at, what are the most important things? Look at your list for the day and say to yourself, okay, there's 10 things on here. If I had to let one go, which one would it be? Which one of these things, nothing's bad is really going to happen if I let it go. Of course, I want to do it. I'm an ambitious person. I have a lot of aspirations, but what could I let go and nothing bad would happen? And then complete that process. Keep doing that until you've got a set of things that something bad will happen if you don't do it today, right? Yeah. And then these are the things I have to focus on. And if I have more time, then I can go to the other aspirational items.
I'm guilty of that too, by the way. And to our callers who wondered, where did that third person go? Megan's internet connection dropped in. So she'll be rejoining us.
This is how it is.
Another second, but I can fill in with this. I felt like in the past, I personally was taking the feeling that I was a failure if I couldn't make everything a priority. So for example, I was known to say yes to things that I've since learned are not a good idea. Yes, I realize you can only meet at 6 a.m. And sometimes I'm willing to bend that, but other times I cannot. And with this pandemic causing me to have to, for example, wait in line at the grocery store at a predetermined time that the grocery store decides. The grocery store, I have a 24-hour grocery store that tells me that because of my needs, I need to be there between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. these 3 days a week, or I don't get to have the experience I need. So I'm having to make, I'm having to decline some things, and I'm having to be okay with the fact that I can say, no, I can't do that now. I know it's inconvenience for you, but we're all inconvenienced. Is that what we need to recognize, is that it's not, don't put the blame all on yourself. It's okay to not be able to do everything.
Oh, it's 100% okay. This is something that I'm working with people on all the time. It's a philosophy that I'm pretty sure I coined called task realism, which basically is this, right? Look, we're not going to be able to get everything done. Just in our previous life, in this life, we're just not. That's why prioritization is a thing, right? And so what would you rather do? Would you rather have, if you're going to get 3 things done today, no matter what, would you rather have 10 things on your list and get 3 of them done? Or would you rather have 3 things on your list and get them all done, right? Which is going to feel better to you at the end of the day? And the result is the same, right? You got these 3 things done.
Yeah. Well, you talk a lot about stress, and I have personally had a healthcare situation in my life that added a lot of stress in the last few years. And as a result, I had anxiety that I had never noticed before. Perhaps I had some of it. I just didn't feel it the way that I feel it now. And I had to see a doctor and talk to the doctor about anxiety. And what she pointed out was a lot of this is what we conjure up in our head. It's the fear of what we believe might happen or what other people might think about us or what might, transpire in the future. We have no way of knowing whether any of these things are true. But we conjure them up in our head. Are there tactics that you can use to try to relieve the stress that you feel when you know that little creeping feeling is coming into the back of your head?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I mean, one thing I think is that we can just get everything out of our head. So do a big brain dump of anytime you feel overwhelmed during the day, just take a few minutes and do a brain dump. And what I mean by that is just literally stream of consciousness, everything you're thinking about, everything you're worried about, all the things that you have to do, just get it down on paper. Because there's something that happens when or Evernote or whatever, right? You get it in a way that you can see it. Because what happens then is instead of churning, we are actually able to take action. We're like, okay, here's this 15 things. Okay, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. I can't do that, whatever it is. So I think that's one way we can do it. I think the other way is really to just say to ourselves, we don't know what reality is until it happens, right? And that's easier said than done. But I think that sometimes when we can experiment with things, so it's like, okay, today we didn't get all 15 things done. Did anything bad happen the next day? Did anyone think about us badly? No. Wow. And another thing that we can do is actually communicate with people. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling like you can't get it all done, have a conversation with your manager that's like, here's my priorities. Here's what I'm focusing on. Here are the things I'm not focusing on that are on the back burner. Do you agree with those priorities? Right?
Good.
And it's so much easier to have that conversation than it is to have the conversation of I feel overworked and overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
How do you feel about working on morale? I think managers are challenged with how do they keep morale up in a time period when they're not really in control of the messaging, right? There's so many messages coming at us that are from external sources that normally in your cubicle dwelling environment at work, you might be protected from until, before and after work, you can hear them, but you don't always hear them. But now all day they're coming at you. What's your advice for keeping morale high by trying to tune out that noise?
Well, I think that as senior leadership or managers, we can just ask people for what they need right now, right? Because we don't know, right? It's kind of the same as when you're giving somebody some reward for their 5th anniversary at work, right? And you give them this great plaque and then they're like, I don't want a plaque, right? And so it's kind of just being in touch with people more frequently and asking them what they need. You're gonna have some people who say I wanna do all these virtual happy hours, right? And you're gonna have some people that are I can't stand to be on Zoom for one more second. I need to be doing something else. And so I think we can ask people what they need to help keep up morale.
Well, speaking of asking people what they need, how can we as content creators, now that we know that we have to manage our own stress and set our expectations differently, how do we transfer that and what special skills do we need to deploy to make sure that we're not overwhelming our customers, and what things should we be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them is we need to be reading the room, right? So, and I bet Megan has something to say about this as well, but I think that we need to be saying okay, at the beginning of this, every single thing was COVID-19, work from home, etc. And now I think we've reached our threshold of how much we can handle from that, right? Yeah. But where are we now? What's the right messaging now? What's going to really sink in with people and feel supportive to them so that when we come out of this, our brand is going to feel like a brand that stayed with people, right, versus a brand that kind of just either went gung-ho and never even mentioned COVID-19 or that went in the opposite direction. I don't know, Megan, what do you have to say about that?
Right. Yeah, I read something just this morning.
Megan, are you still on the line? I think we're still having some challenges with Megan's video and audio.
I can see her and hear her.
Can you?
Yeah, I think it's... Yeah.
I'm not sure why. Megan, I can't hear you, but if Alexis can hear you, you can ask a question.
There we go. So I read something this morning about how messaging is changing, right? And so we went through a time where everything was about empathy and
Alexis,
basically
you'll have
saying
to tell
we
the audience
know,
and us, me especially, what she asked.
So we need to know, we were saying, here's COVID. We know that COVID is a big thing. We need to be empathetic. Now we're kind of switching to where people aren't actually responding to COVID subject lines. The COVID and coronavirus and all of that stuff is going down in terms of response rates. And what's coming up is let's work together, let's partner, let's, kind of giving hope for the future. And so really changing your messaging, I think there is a big, great thing to do. But more than that, how do we make sure that we're being effective as a brand in communicating what we want to communicate without crossing that line of sending too many webinars or too many talk shows or, too many emails, too many of that? Do you have any sort of rule of thumb of how we can really be sensitive to our customers, but at the same time communicate effectively the things that we need to as a brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some things that we can do, right? One of them is, I think, to be, like, who doesn't love a survey, right? But let people know. Also, monitoring people's unsubscribes to our email lists and things, right? Like if you notice that you are either you're looking at your open rates or you're looking at your unsubscribes and you're noticing that certain types of messaging is not working anymore, because again, we might be in this hype cycle, right? Where, we were in the trough of disillusionment for a while and we might be kind of on the slope to enlightenment now, right? But people might be in a position where they're ready for hope and action. And if we're still sending them messages that are all about kind of extreme crisis abatement right now, when they're ready to take action and solve business problems, that might not be the right message. And so I think it's actually being more into our analytics than we were previously. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. And there's a question that I'm going to read, and I think I'm going to go a little different direction. So they're saying, is it okay to have virtual happy hours during working hours? Please suggest. And I think the question is for employees, but I also wonder if we do the same thing with customers. Is that okay? Is it not okay? How do we understand the amount of time that they'll spend with us? So these really creative ways of getting customers and or employees together, what's okay and what's not okay today?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I probably would shy away from a 1 p.m. virtual happy hour with our customers or our employees. But I think, one thing
5 p.m. somewhere, though.
That's right.
I mean, one thing I've been suggesting a lot to people is it's not just the happy hour. We can have virtual lunches. We can have virtual coffees. Would people want to get on? I mean, we have to eat lunch anyway, right? Would people want to get on and kind of just have that same experience with each other? How can we kind of create more of those situations, but maybe with less of a time commit, right? So you don't have to be here for an hour or 2 hours. Could you show up for 15 minutes and talk to some people and just have that kind of a similar to experience as if you were going into the office kitchen, grabbing a coffee, you ran into a colleague and you chatted for 15 minutes, right?
Right.
All right, so I can now hear and see Megan, our technology snafu's occur live apparently now. We get to experience all the failures in real time. Speaking of that, though, we had talked yesterday in our pre-call a little bit about how we can reduce that stress by kind of that we're in this situation together and all the things that are changing. For example, the two of you have children at home, and I know that Alexis has actually prepared some content thinking about that subject that other people would find interesting. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think you should all have a link. I created, when all of this started, I started thinking about my clients, this is all we're talking about, et cetera. And I created a working parents coronavirus quarantine survival guide.
Awesome.
Basically talks you through what are the things we really need to be thinking about in terms of how to keep kids moving, how to keep them learning, how to keep them motivated, how to keep their world in, kind of moving along and bustling along. Because if their world's not bustling along, our world isn't either, right? If they're in business all the time and they're needing things from us. And so I've created some content there really talking about what are the resources that are available to us right now? And also, what are the things that we need? How do we create a schedule that isn't this crazy color-coded thing that, nobody can achieve? But how do we create something that really moves people along? How do we know how much time to spend with our kids in between? Can we set them up for 5 minutes and then get 45 minutes of work time, right? What are the of activities we can do? How can we set them up for success so that, just simple things like snacks are available at their height so they don't have to go
Right.
in the middle of a meeting. So lots of different tips like that for how do we, it's about our kids, but it's also about how do we get our work done.
Yeah.
Speaking
That's
about
super
work,
interesting.
a lot of people have other people in their life that are not children's, maybe significant others or family members that they're taking care of, right?
Yep.
And we're also having to deal with that. What if you need to work late, one of our viewers asks, and your significant other doesn't and feels a little bit neglected? Do we have to do extra? I mean, it's already taxing on us already, but what's necessary for us to do that and kind of show the love that we have for the other people in our lives?
Yeah, I mean, I have kind of a trick for that I do, which is basically if I have a night where I want to work on something or I need to work on something, I always tell my husband, okay, put on whatever show you really like that I don't like that much, right? But that we're still watching together so that we can sit there and I can be kind of halfway engaged and he's happy that we're sitting together watching this show, right? So are there ways that you can kind of do that? I mean, the other side of it is communicate, right? In the beginning, the beginning of the day or the beginning of the work week or whenever you're going to have this period where you have to work late, just talk about it and say I actually have to work late tonight. Could we, watch that movie on Thursday or whatever it is? I think that the more we can communicate and iterate, we're all human beings and we all have the same issues fundamentally, right? And so I think that communication is super helpful. I mean, I don't know. How do you guys feel about this?
Megan, do you have a plan or a tactic?
We have 2 dogs that are very needy, right? And so my husband and I take long walks with the dogs, and that's how we bond. And we talk about all the things that we want to talk about. And so we've actually connected very well, despite the fact that I'm working long hours. We're trying to raise and teach our 4 kids, and he's fixing the house. He's ripped the kitchen up. So we've got craziness going on in the house, but we take the time to get out and do a 3-mile walk with the dogs, which is sort of killing 2 birds with 1 stone because the dogs get crazy if they don't have their walk. So we've just been really good about doing that together. And then if I have to come back and get to work, I do work, and he's okay because we just spent 3 miles walking together. It's what we do.
Yeah.
Well, in this time, it seems like we're all learning new lessons, whether we wanted to or not. And our creativity is something that we should deploy whenever we can, right? And I think that taking a little bit of risk is also important. Megan, have you found that when you're working from home and having meetings that that there's undue stress amongst team members? I mean, can you tell that things are going on in your team?
We have such a geographic distance because a lot of the company is in Israel. We've got people on the East Coast, people on the West Coast. So we're so geographically distributed. What I see is that we all have a very different perspective of where this COVID thing is based on where we're at. And that kind of drives how people are feeling. It drives how people behave, but it also drives how we make decisions, right? And so we all come at it from a very different perspective. So I think the geographic distance makes it more challenging. I was remote before this happened, so I'm sort of used to being remote from the team. I haven't noticed a big difference there, but I do notice the stress level going up for the folks that don't go into the office and have that sort of time to get to know each other. But I'm a little bit more distanced from it. So I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. It seems like, though, we have to address, as content professionals, we always try to deliver the right piece of information to the right person for the right reason at the right time in the right language and so on. And now we have to be even more concerned about where that person that we're targeting lives and what their experience is in order for us to not come off as flippant or unaware or unconcerned, right? Because some places are having a much bigger challenge with this pandemic, and it's more frightening for people because of the area that they live in. How do we address that, Alexis? I mean, to be kind of aware of other people's stress.
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially when it's maybe our customers, which we're not, we can't ask them, hey, how are you doing today? What would be the right thing to send you, right? I mean, I think that to the amount, can we segment things? Can we have instead of one blanket message, that goes out to everyone, which might have been fine in a non-pandemic world, is, we send out this marketing message and it applies to most people and the other people ignore it, right?
Right.
Instead, can we be a little bit more targeted, right? So do segmentation of our email lists and, make sure that what we're sending out is at the very least not offensive to those people, right? And
right.
what they're thinking. But I think that's one way to do it, is more niche, more targeted messaging, and maybe not so much of it.
I think you shared with Megan also some concerns about why we might want to use this opportunity to repurpose content. Megan, do you remember where we were going with that?
Yeah, so we in the content world, we think a lot about reusing content, right? We think a lot about how we create a snippet of content that can be used in multiple places. And so we were talking about the idea of, if you have to prioritize, kind of like you talked about earlier, flipping the prioritization on its head. I don't know if you used those exact words, because I think it was while I was offline. But so this idea of flipping prioritization and saying that, what do we not do? So thinking about how do we reuse content and decide not to create new when it's appropriate versus creating new instead of reusing, and kind of finding that balance. So how would content professionals think through that?
Yeah, I think part of it is like, okay, is there content that is actually going to be like, how can I bring it down to what is relevant to the most amount of people? And then maybe I can tailor that little snippet a little bit for those people. But I think also this reuse of content gets us into the other things we're talking about. It's like, how can we leverage what we've already built to be able to serve us in this time where we are, really just flat out busy constantly with all the new things that we have to do, right? So it's one, like, how can we tailor it? But also, how can we help our own mental stress about just having to constantly create new things by taking what we have and repurposing it for the uses that may make sense right now?
Right.
That is a great place. That is a great place to end our discussion, I think. Content reuse, many of our viewers have seen the value of that and have been struggling, quite frankly, some companies more than others, trying to figure out a way to repurpose content. And they didn't always find the business driver of efficiency to be sufficient to invest the time and resources. But maybe today, because of the situation we're in, we're going to see a little bit more adoption of personalization and other content tactics that can help us deliver the right information to the right people when they need it. So thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate your time, Alexis.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, Megan, for co-hosting with me. It was an adventure, right?
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks, Alexis. This was really, really interesting and enlightening.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
So much.
There were no pants off moments, unfortunately, but we did have an internet snafu, so we'll have to go down in history as pants on, but internet off.
Yeah. Very nice.
We'd like to thank our sponsor today, Zoomin Software. Companies spend all kinds of money creating valuable content they want to resonate with their customers, but sometimes they package it up in dated, static, and a frustrating experience. But Zoomin Software lets you deliver up-to-date, personalized product answers whenever and wherever your customers need them, whether it's in your documentation, in your product itself, or in a product portal or an online community. Companies like Dell, ServiceNow, and McAfee are some of Zoomin's customers. They rely on their digital experience platform to increase their customer satisfaction, reduce churn, and drive revenue by delivering dynamic digital experiences across all kinds of customer touchpoints. Do yourself a favor and visit zoominsoftware.com to schedule a demonstration or to find out how you can modernize your content strategy and deliver the right content to the right person at the right time. All right, Zoomin Software's URL is zoominsoftware.com. All right, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Content Wrangler Scott Abel, and on behalf of Megan and Alexis, I'd like to say goodbye. Thanks for joining us for today's show, The Content Advantage, and we'll see you at another show in the near future.